March 23, 2005. America's third largest refinery was making $1 billion a year. But on this ordinary morning, a forgotten $5 padlock set off a chain reaction that would kill 15 people, injure 180 more, and wipe $4.5 billion from BP's books. The official story points to technical glitches and bad luck, but the truth goes deeper. Beneath record profits, routine warnings, and slashed budgets left millions at risk. How could one missing padlock bring down an industrial giant? The answer begins in the boardroom. Long before anyone noticed the danger, profits at the Texas City refinery soared to record heights in the years before the disaster. Each day, 475,000 barrels of crude oil flowed through the site, enough to keep America's engines running and BP's executives celebrating. In 2004, the refinery generated $1 billion in profit, making it one of the most lucrative industrial assets in the country. Ledger sheets from BP's London headquarters tracked the windfall with precision, while internal memos praised the site for delivering more with less. Yet beneath these financial triumphs, a different set of numbers told a quieter story. Maintenance budgets shrank year after year, even as the aging plant demanded more attention. Workers described a culture of cost control, where every request for new equipment or repairs was weighed against quarterly targets. Safety improvements were routinely postponed, categorized as expenses that could wait. Staffing levels thinned, and the pressure to keep units running intensified. The refinery's boardroom celebrated efficiency, but on the plant floor, operators and engineers faced the reality of deferred maintenance and thinning margins for error. In meeting rooms, executives called it discipline. On the ground, it meant running a high-risk operation with fewer resources and less room for mistakes. The drive for profitability was relentless. But the unseen cost was an eroding foundation, one that would soon be tested in the harshest way possible. In the months before the explosion, evidence of trouble accumulated in the daily rhythm of the refinery. Maintenance logs tell the story. The raffinate splitter's level gauge, essential for tracking the buildup of hydrocarbons, had been out of service since August 2004. Operators filed repeated work orders, but each request for repair slipped down the priority list as other tasks took precedence. Without a reliable gauge, crews relied on experience and guesswork to monitor the tower's contents. 8 major vapor releases had already occurred in this same unit over the previous decade, each one a warning that never led to permanent fixes. Internal records document near misses, with hydrocarbon clouds escaping confinement and dispersing across the site. On March 23, 2005, wind speeds at Texas City hovered around 18 miles per hour, with gusts pushing past 20. The threshold that should have triggered a halt to hazardous operations. Yet the startup continued. Safety staff voiced concerns about both the weather and the malfunctioning instrumentation. But the drive to resume production overruled caution. The refinery's tolerance for risk had become routine, with each overlooked alert blending into the background noise of daily operations. In this environment, even clear danger signals lost their urgency, setting the stage for a disaster that no one would be able to ignore. Operators in the Texas City control room faced a critical blind spot as the isomerization unit came back online. The primary level gauge on the raffinate splitter tower had been out of commission for months, but on this day the backup was also disabled. The independent high-level safety switch, designed as a final barrier against overfilling, could be overridden only if a simple $5 padlock was missing. That lock was nowhere to be found. Without it, the switch could be left in the off position, rendering the safeguard useless. For 3.5 hours, the team started the unit essentially in the dark, relying on memory and intuition instead of live data. Control room logs from March 23rd show operators referencing instrument readings that made little sense, with alarms that failed to trigger when they mattered most. No one could say for sure how much raffinate was accumulating inside the 170-foot tower. By the time the error was fully realized, the window for intervention had already closed. The disaster's first domino had fallen, set in motion by a missing lock that cost less than a cup of coffee. At 12:41 p.m., the raffinate splitter tower could no longer contain its load. Hydrocarbon liquid surged past its design limits, spilling over into the atmospheric blowdown stack. In less than a minute, 300 tons of gasoline, enough to fill more than 100 tanker trucks, flooded out of the vent, cascading down the stack and pooling on the ground. The hot mixture rapidly vaporized, rising and spreading into a dense, invisible cloud. Winds of nearly 20 miles per hour pushed the vapor plume across the site, drifting 25 feet to a nearby diesel pickup idling outside the contractor trailers. The vapor, heavier than air, hugged the ground and slipped into the truck's air intake. Moments later, the engine backfired, sending a spark into the heart of the cloud. At precisely 1:14 p.m., the refinery was rocked by an explosion measured at 2.4 on the Richter scale. The blast front tore through metal, concrete, and glass, igniting secondary fires and reducing the surrounding area to twisted wreckage. In that instant, every safeguard had failed, and the disaster became irreversible. Every disaster leaves behind a trail of questions, none more haunting than the ones about what might have been. Safety analysts reviewing the Texas City explosion mapped out a series of near misses, each one a fork in the road where catastrophe could have been averted. If the $5 padlock had been in place, the high-level switch would have locked out manual overrides, halting the filling process before the tower overflowed. That single piece of hardware, a ratio of 1 to 900 million in cost, stood between routine startup and disaster. Weather records show that wind gusts reached and sometimes exceeded the refinery's operating limit of 20 miles per hour. Had the wind dropped just a few miles per hour, the vapor cloud might have lingered in place, never drifting toward the idling pickup. Even the truck's location played a decisive role. If site rules about vehicle sighting had been enforced, the ignition source would have been well outside the hazard zone. In each scenario, the chain reaction unravels before it begins. The difference between normal operation and tragedy narrowed to a handful of overlooked details, each one small enough to pass unnoticed, yet large enough to change everything. 15 lives ended in an instant. Every victim a contractor working inside temporary trailers stationed just 150 feet from the isomerization unit. Among them were James and Linda Rowe, a married couple who never made it home, and Kimberly Smith, whose family would later fight for answers in court. The blast injured 180 others, leaving survivors with burns, shattered bones, and trauma that would linger far beyond the headlines. Across Texas City, 43,000 residents were ordered to shelter in place as emergency sirens wailed and toxic smoke drifted over neighborhoods. An OSHA inspector present on site captured the chaos as it unfolded, footage that would become central to the investigation, and a haunting record of a day when routine work turned deadly. The financial aftermath of the Texas City explosion rippled far beyond the plant gates. Immediate property damage reached $200 million, but that was only the beginning. Repairs and lost production added over $1 billion more, as the refinery sat idle through investigations and reconstruction. Civil settlements for victims and their families totaled $2.1 billion, while BP faced a $50 million criminal fine, the largest ever under the Clean Air Act at the time. Federal safety regulators imposed $84.6 million in OSHA penalties, and environmental fines from the EPA and Texas pushed costs higher still. By 2013, BP was forced to sell the refinery for $2.5 billion, closing the books on what had become a $4.5 billion disaster. After Texas City, safety rules across the refining industry changed at their core. New guidelines forced trailers and temporary buildings far from hazard zones, API standards called for at least 330 feet of separation, enforced through OSHA audits. Atmospheric blowdown stacks, once common, were rapidly eliminated. All major releases now had to route to enclosed flares. Refineries upgraded to redundant sensors and computerized monitoring, making it harder for a single failure to go unnoticed. Site-wide wind monitoring became standard, integrating real-time data into emergency plans. In 2013, BP sold the Texas City Refinery. Its legacy became a blueprint for modern process safety. On March 23, 2005, 15 lives were lost, and $4.5 billion vanished in the space of a few seconds, traced to a missing $5 padlock and a disabled safety switch. Investigations by OSHA and the Chemical Safety Board documented a pattern of ignored warnings, chronic equipment failures, and cost-cutting that left the nation's third-largest refinery exposed. Decades of incident reports and maintenance logs revealed at least 8 prior vapor releases in the same unit. Yet questions remain. Some internal BP deliberations and safety audits from that period are still not public. What is clear is the impact. New federal rules now require distant sighting of trailers, computerized monitoring, and redundant safety systems at every U.S. refinery. As a direct result, the Texas City disaster is now a mandatory case study in engineering and safety programs. The evidence shows a single overlooked detail can decide the fate of thousands. That is the enduring lesson written in documented loss and enforced reform.